So baby lights will always lift lovely and clean and blonde, and anything that's thicker or chunkier is either going to need heavier saturation or potentially maybe a higher lightener or whatever. So you might have to go up a shade of developer or a level. So this next one, to get us back into something that's a bit more blended and more natural, we'll weave. And again, I'm not leaving any space in between because I'm relying on my blend to kind of to buffer all this out. But I do want these sections quite close, so I'm not dropping a whole line worth of low light there. So this is our weave section. Again, same thing, go down nice and low. And I'm gonna actually stop coming up so high as I move along here, which means that in the front section, you're gonna have your very first foil will be closest to the scalp. And as we move back, if they keep dropping, you're gonna create a V effect as you go down, which is what we're kind of looking for. So, take them out. And I think as well, remember that I've promised myself time to do a bit of a root melt on this later on. So even if I did my worst job or my least amount of effort and left a lot of lines in here, there's so much I can do with the basin to blend that out. So there's really no fear as long as you have accounted for the time to go back and do root melts in your application. If it's something that you haven't scheduled or you don't usually schedule, you just kind of make it a regular toning appointment, you kind of might need to go back and have a little look at your process and see, is that something that you want to start incorporating so that you have the time to do these kind of techniques? So just to finish off this section, and we're starting to get into the longer hair, I'm just going to gather all this up. That's a big slice. Come down to the end of it. There might not be much to back home here, but I'm going to give it one big push. There you go. So there's all your little baby hairs and broken hairs. So the hair that I was holding is the hair that I'm going to bleach. And when I push that up, it gets it right out of the way. And that means that all these sections are going to sit in and create my little veil and my shadow there. So down nice and low. And you can progressively stop coming up so high then. So I'll stop about there with my blend. Drop my board out. And then nice heavy saturation on these sections. Pull your foil, flip it over. And tuck it all out of the way. And they'd be my foils for my money piece. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So some heads I might do 3 or 4, depends on what kind of shape their hairline gives me and what their cut is like. So these sections are basically going to be just a couple of back-to-back little baby lights here, just again to create the same face frame that we had down below. We don't spend too much time on them because, again, we're working on a brunette. If you are working with a blonde who wants a really strong face frame and wants to be able to pull that back and have blonde on site, you'll do them really tight to the head. You'll nearly treat it like a full head of highlights and make sure that they're close to the root, and then you can do all your blending internally. So in terms of placement, where our money piece was very straight and direct here, by using these horizontal sections, you get full impact in that section. As we come to the sides here and up through this area, I'm going to stop going horizontal and start creating diagonal sections. What happens with the diagonal section is it disperses a little bit differently in the head. So when you do your traditional T-bar and you use a mohawk section, so where we pull our T-bar back, if you tilt your head back for me, sir. So if, say, you were going to weave off this kind of section, and it's your traditional kind of straight T-bar. When you split that hair and it splits into the parting, those strands of hair sit in a straight line. So if you can see that, this is where our stripy kind of effect can come from sometimes. So by coming away from that traditional highlight effect and moving to something that's a little bit more diagonal, if you look at where a diagonal section disperses when it lies down, if I take the diagonal section in natural fall, So natural fall as in when the hair sits down into its own growth pattern. It can only be stripy if it's diagonal again. So when those sections are pulled tight, which is not a way that people tend to wear their hair. If they do, they do. But mostly when the hair is down and we're showing it off, it's going to sit like this, which means you get a softer effect. So those stripes aren't possible when you work with diagonals that way, which is a nice trick. So again, there's nothing really fancy about this. It's just baby lighten, get them in there. I think the trick with this section is actually going to be in blending out. And to be honest, we have quite a few highlights here, so I'm actually not going to do much work on this section. Pull this out of my way. And just do a really tiny little weave in here. If you were working with maybe virgin hair, you might spend a little bit more time getting this very precise, but actually because there's a lot of hair already highlighted here, some of my work is kind of done for me here. So we're going to work up the head and maybe have 3 to 4 diagonal foils in here on either side. And then I'm going to meet you back up here to look after this section. So we have all our baby lights in on the side. So I've done about 3 packets on either side. And now we're in our final 2 triangles at the end. So a couple of things to note. Tip your head down for me, sir. So when I hit the edge of both of these sections, I was left with this kind of extra area of dark hair. I'm actually choosing to drop that. And the way that I've done my sectioning is very specifically designed to make these pieces contrast with what goes on back here. So if you can see, there's this kind of, I'd say about pinky space worth of gap. Now going by my hand, so yours might be different, but at least a little finger space there where if all this brightness is right here, the reason that that's going to stand out is because this depth is backing it, is right behind it. So anywhere where you have lightness in the hair, it's going to push forward and it's going to seek to be seen. And all this depth then is going to create that emphasis. So you do need the dark in order to have the light when it comes to these kind of placements. So I'm leaving this bit out and I'm skipping it, which also means it's one less thing we have to do, which is great. Moving on to this section. So this is kind of the spare little triangle that I've made. And the reason that I take this out is because a lot of this is internal, will never be seen unless we're picking through, which means that we can leave a lot of the work here up to our root melt and our blending. So all we need to do is make sure that we include it and that we get a little bit of emphasis around the lengths and ends and the face frame. So we have blonde sitting right here. So I'm gonna pick this section up and just cut across this first part of the triangle. I'm still going diagonal, but it's fairly shallow. So it's not a pure straight line. And I'm going to just pop this one up out of the way. So this is again going to be teasy light. And again, you can see all the old highlights are in here now. So get them out of the way and just drag them down. Get rid of that. We have a couple of little strands, but we'll pop them out as we go. So again, picking it up and looking at what are we sitting on here. I don't need to put blondes on top of blondes. So I'm going to give a little bit of this back. And now I have still a chunky section, still too messy to do highlights on, but it's perfect for balayage. So I might just pick this up and decide, since we're in the front, I actually want quite a lot of pre-lightener here. I want to see lots of blonde in this front face frame. So more so than I would have at the back. So actually looking at that section now and the density of hair, there's not a lot of hair left there. So there's no point in me weaving any extra out of that. I'm just going to go to the end, pick it up and back home that out. And then if you see what you've got left, that's like a baby light, that's like a regular little highlight. So you've got this difference in texture and dimension. And when you imagine all this combed through or even curled together, they're going to swirl into each other and they're going to be all different densities worth of pre-lightener. So you're going to get multiple tones and multiple colors. So board back in. Pop that under there. If you find that you're back home and it's slipping down, it's a little bit messy, you can just skim it back up and you can pop your comb in and that'll just guard it and keep it all back there. The only way the comb will stay in is if you have that board right up against your head. So you've got to use that tension to help you keep it there. So again, work down a little bit lower. Because we're coming around to the front of the face, keep in mind that our pre-lightener stopped here at this area on the money piece. So if you imagine this line continuing on, I really don't want my pre-lightener to get much higher than this. So if I load my brush as far as there, my highest point is going to be somewhere there. So I'm just creating soft little flicks so that these guys blend and I kind of maintain my pattern the whole way. And if anything has gone too far, all we do later on is root melt it out. So if maybe you lost that pattern or you kind of just forgot about it, if something like maybe one of these highlights in the back is too high, we take it out later on at the basin, it's fine. So drop your board and saturate those sections. Flick, so that's a double fold so that you don't disturb your blend. Pop it up. Tuck your foil. So as we come along here, when we spoke earlier on about the diagonal sectioning, this is where that really comes into play. So we could have the choice to do a mohawk section through here, where when all that hair settles down, sometimes you're left with a stripy effect. So we've already decided we're not doing that. Then we can go diagonal, which is what I do want to do. The alternative is also keep heading up here, but that means that if you do, say, put in a slice, that's going to be a chunk of blonde going in a straight line across her hair, which you won't want. So if you are going to work horizontally up the head, make sure you're doing weaves and you're really deliberate with your placing. You think about it as you go along. But I'm going to choose to do a few diagonals because I might just decide for impact to do a big slice, or I might just want to save time and do a slice and not weave. So it gives me options. So I'm looking at this gap, making sure that I leave a little bit of space. So I'm going to take a section out here, and you can see the highlights that are already there. So I'm obviously going to dodge them again. So if I pick this up, I'm going to take quite a fine section here in the bit that is nearest her parting. So if I take a small enough weave, then I can take something that's a little bit more obvious underneath. I'm going to skip that blonde. And then as I get into these internal sections, I can pick up something that's quite thick. I'm still going to look at this. I have one blonde right here. So actually this one is going to sit on top of it. So I'm going to drop that. I don't need it. So I can teasy like this. I've actually dodged putting the tease on this area. So if you see my comb only went in as far as there, because this is so skinny and so fine, there's nothing to tease. There's no point in doing that. So. So board in, comb on, bit of tension. If you want to pop your comb in to keep it all there. And we'll apply nice and low, thinking about this line carrying on. So it's going to come in somewhere around there. So when I flick up, I'm going to stop roughly around where that placement kicks in. And if you go over it a little bit, it's fine, because everything's going to be blended at the end. All that does is make sure that if you choose not to root melt, or if you're caught on time, you don't necessarily have to, but you'll always have the option. So the better you get at your blending and your placements, you won't necessarily need the root melt later on unless it's just the look you've chosen to go for. But if you do have anything that needs correcting, you're going to have to factor in the root melt later on. So for my next section then, I want to make sure that I leave deliberate space. And again, remember, she's